Good afternoon. Welcome to the final presentation for today under the title Transboundary Water Management for Sustainable Development. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Allan N. Williams. Dr. Williams is a graduate of Cornell University and has functioned as a consultant to regional and international institutions over the last 50 years as a resource management economist in resolving sustainability issues in land and water resource use. He has created analytical instruments such as water portfolio management in response to the water deficit situation in the Eastern Caribbean. He has also been a founding member of two freshwater management companies, the Caribbean Water Transshipment Company and Deluge Inc., both registered in the island of Dominica. He has authored various articles available in Cornell University Academia and a recent volume entitled Deluge, Dominica's Water Surplus, the Caribbean Water Crisis, and the Global Water Challenge. Act Press 2020. I now present to you Dr. Williams.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Allan Williams. I suppose that I'm given the privilege to get us back to the original program setting, so I'm happy to be able to resume with my contribution. Most of you are aware of the fact that the story of us in the Caribbean has been told primarily by trade in commodities. In the 17th to 19th century, it was the trade in sugar and chattel slavery that wrote our story. In the first 60 years of independence, it was the trade in tourism services that mostly wrote our story. Today, however, we have a new commodity threatening to rewrite all of the progress to make it sound like an obituary of our presence in the Caribbean. No, it's not oil. That commodity is water, or more precisely, the lack of adequate supplies of fresh water for the people of the region. My generation witnessed freshwater access move from the standpipe on the side of the road to our kitchen faucet. The generation that followed has grown accustomed to the expectation that not every time you turn on the faucet, something will come out. Today, we now have a generation that is being nurtured on the belief that you have to leave the pipe open so that you can hear when the water finally comes. This is the frustration that characterizes the freshwater crisis in the Eastern Caribbean. So much so that the Global Water Partnership, in reviewing the challenges facing small island states in the Eastern Caribbean, was forced to ask a question which they did not really answer. And that question was, should things be done differently, or should different things be done? Today I'm going to attempt to answer that question by arguing in my paper for a different thing to be done. How different? Different in the sense that the solution we will propose is 80% economics and 20% politics. If you are aware, you would have realized by now that all of the proposed solutions to the current water crisis have been 90% political and less than 10% economic. Now, our different story starts by focusing not on drought, low rainfall levels, or dried up reservoirs, because these are stock values. Water is a flow concept. So we start by focusing on the comparative rates of flow of water into and out of our national water system. When the rate of inflows into the water system is continuously below the rate of outflows from the water system, it creates what we have called a water deficit condition. This map shows the water deficit footprint of the most impacted islands in the Eastern Caribbean. But look carefully. Not all the islands have this problem. Dominica does not have a water deficit problem. Actually, Dominica has a water surplus. It is the only water surplus island in the Eastern Caribbean. If you did not know that before, you know it now. But this is not such a unique situation as you may think. When we study the freshwater crisis globally, it is not unusual for us to find in a region of water-stressed countries one country in which the per capita water availability ratio is so high in respect to its neighbors that is considered a water surplus country. We can see this in Turkey in the Middle East, the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, Indonesia in Southeast Asia, and Dominica in our region of the Eastern Caribbean. But here is the difference that you must understand. In the cases of the top two, the issue of managing and sharing water resources is treated as a case for transboundary water resolution. Last night, we attended a workshop by the Global Water Partnership entitled Bridging Borders, Collaborative Solutions for Transboundary Water in the Caribbean. That dealt primarily with the top two situations. That is a political decision. But there are transboundary water issues among island states, especially when one or two of these states can act as a surplus source of fresh water to its neighbors. This is the case shown in the lower two countries in our graph. Their sharing of a surplus water resource is definitely a case that would have to be resolved by commercial trade in freshwater, and that would be an economic decision. It is in this light that we propose that the example of importance to the Eastern Caribbean is the case of Singapore, where 50% of the water supply comes from imported water and 25% comes from desalination. We need only to compare this with Antigua and Barbuda, where 83% of the water comes from desalination sources and 0% comes from imported sources. Now get this. The existence of a surplus in water resources in any one country does not automatically lead to a trade in water resources with its next-door water-stressed neighbors. When such a trade in freshwater does occur, it is usually through intentionally designed and brokered arrangements, not with governments and water authorities, but with a wide array of public and private actors, many of whom right now are sitting on the periphery when it comes to frontline water service providers. This paper argues that given some new developments, it is now possible to broker a trade arrangement in freshwater supplies at volumes that will significantly reduce the water deficit in Eastern Caribbean countries. But to get there, we have first to reconstruct some of the concepts and ideas. Now we all know that Dominica's water surplus has played no role in alleviating the water shortages in its neighboring islands such as Antigua. There are two reasons for this. The first is that we do not have a regional water resource management system to rationalize such a trade. And the second, which follows from the first, is that no island in the Eastern Caribbean has a capacity to receive imported bulk water from this surplus source. We will get into the latter conditions of games theory of strategic interaction and incentives later on. But here's the good news. Both of these conditions are now likely to change. We have articulated a regional water resource management model, which we have called water portfolio management. Water portfolio management does one major thing different. It recognizes all water resource flows as assets, and as such, the regional water resource management task becomes an exercise in asset portfolio management. That's why we call it water portfolio management. There is a cardinal rule for asset portfolio management, and it is this. So long as an asset, regardless of where it occurs, whether within our political boundaries or outside of our political boundary, so long as that asset can be brought into the local domain at a cost that is lower than the average cost of incrementing the water supply to the entire system, that becomes a legitimate water asset for our water portfolio. Now, what does that mean? Right now, in the current water crisis in Antigua, if it is available, you can buy a truckload of water for EC $300 per 1,000 gallons. That's equivalent to US $110 per 1,000 gallons. So according to our asset portfolio maximization principle, if we can deliver fresh water from Dominica's water surplus at, say, $45 a 1,000 gallons, we would have created enough incentive for a brokered trade in freshwater supplies. As to the second condition, this is also about to change. The Port of St. John's in Antigua is undertaking an expansion drive, and part of that drive is to build a 4 million gallon water storage tank at the port. This will make this port the first port in the Eastern Caribbean which will have a capacity to receive imported bulk water. But before we can develop such a trade, we have to do two additional things. We have to build an operational framework of all the parties likely to be involved in such trade, and we have to clearly define the intrinsic value for each of them to do so. Let us look at the potential framework for such a trade. In the water import management strategy, we start with the Dominica Water Authority, DOWASCO, which has indicated its willingness to activate its bulk loading facility with a capacity to load up to 6 million gallons per day, provided it can see a verified significant demand for water coming from the other islands in the region. So Dominica has a volume demand incentive. The Water Transshipment Company, a group of entrepreneurs coming out of Dominica, have validated the feasibility of transporting bulk water into the port of St. John's in Antigua at a cost below US $4 to $5 per 1,000 gallons. But this is only feasible if they can ship at a minimum 1.2 million gallons per trip. So feasibility in freshwater transshipment also has a trade volume precondition. In the second level of the framework, we go one step further. Game theory is a study of rational decision making that can result sometimes in conflict and other times in collaboration. It helps to identify how we make decisions in situations in which our actions are interdependent, but the benefits that flow from such coordinated decisions are mutual. Now you can see how individual self-interest and organizational contentment can bring all of these varied trade parameters into a correct focus. Let me explain. The Port of St. John's is now poised to provide us with the gateway for other opportunities. Once it has built a capacity to receive imported water from Dominica's surplus, it will make real, in terms of benefits, a host of subsidiary actions by local and regional organizations. This is called strategic interaction. We mention CWWA because this is the Caribbean's line of first responders in the event of any natural disaster in the Eastern Caribbean. CWWA, along with the U.S. Army and the British Army, have already designated the Port of St. John's as their staging point in responding to natural disasters in the Eastern Caribbean. And what is the major first need of disaster victims? A guaranteed supply of fresh water. Let us add now the case of the Antigua Credit Union League. The Credit Union League claims a membership of about 35,000 members. Antigua's last census says that there were 30,000 households in the country. You do the math and speculate just how many of the credit union members in Antigua are households now with open pipes waiting to hear when the water finally comes. It will take just one simple step for the Antigua Credit Union League to achieve a significant impacting level of organizational contentment. Here is how. In a very innovative way, the Credit Union League can promote a parametric assurance plan indemnifying its members against extreme water stress. The term assurance describes a plan that creates material support for a particular scenario based on the magnitude of the unfolding events and not on the magnitude of the losses. That would be insurance. This plan is assurance. So what is the level of demand likely to be generated in a trade of freshwater imports based on water portfolio management, the surplus surface flows in Dominica, the capacity of the Port of St. John's to receive water imports, and the Credit Union League indemnifying its members? If only half of the members of the Credit Union League, that is 15,000, were to buy into an assurance plan that delivers to each one in the plan a supply of 400 gallons of water per week, that would mean a total demand of 6 million gallons per week, or 24 million gallons per month. Combine this with 8 million gallons per month for the port's needs. This model would develop a trade import balance of 32 million gallons of supplemental water supply into the island of Antigua. That, my friends, will erase 53% of the current water deficit in Antigua. Now let me end by doing a bit of issue transfer. Issue transfer means transferring the issue to a more action-oriented home base, where such arrangements can be brokered. As I mentioned before, such trade arrangements in the presence of water surpluses have to be brokered by someone with authority and determination. This strategic action plan would need a reputable regional institution like CWWA to engage its sponsors to finance a team of young, passionate trade development researchers to work out with all the necessary parties the operating parameters to make this happen. This is well within the ambit of CWWA, which to date has supported 2 similar regional strategic action plans for the water sector in the Caribbean. What is more important about this action plan is that it will have already built in the critical elements for climate resilience in a Caribbean water system, namely incentives, scalability, and reach. Thank you very much. There are 3 questions to which I will give a response. These have to do with risks, the price of water, and reliance on an external source. There are 2 risk profiles at play here. There is the general risk to any project involving support to the water sector as a whole, whether it be to the water system enhancement or wastewater facility rehabilitation. Then there is the more specific risks dealing with water production and distribution. The largest investment risk in the water sector in the Eastern Caribbean comes from the sector's poor performance in repaying its debt. Globally, the at-risk water sector related debt is estimated at $8 billion, and this is expected to rise as countries pursue energy-intensive supply-side interventions. Generally, this is mainly coming from desalination and wastewater reuse projects through various forms of public and private partnership with sovereign guarantees. Indeed, the region is finding it very difficult to raise further funds for desalination solutions because of the difficulty of the desalination plants in the recent past in recovering their sales revenues from the utilities. The risk profile in water production comes predominantly from the operating cost recovery ratio, which is very low. Most desalination plants operate in the Middle East, and there the operating cost ratio is seldom above 16%, and the rate of non-revenue water is mostly in excess of 40%. Anyone who manages this kind of utility in the Caribbean, that is, a utility that is directly involved in producing water through desalination or in the distribution of desalination water, can tell you that the signs of stress also manifest as deferred maintenance of existing publicly managed parts of the production and distribution system. Buying new technologies is only one part of the puzzle. In the new technology adoption phase, all water engineers have actually to resolve 2 issues. 1, how the new technologies will resolve the production and or distribution issues. But there's a second. They also have to provide answers to how much damage this new solution will do to the risk profile of the water utility. In our water import solution currently discussed in this presentation, the risks at both ends of the market are low. On the supply side, Dominica is not going to run out of fresh water soon. In 2004, the U.S. Army of Engineers studied the surface flow of 6 major drainage basins in the island of Dominica. In 3 of these, the rate of surface flow was estimated at 254 million gallons per 24-hour period. Dominica uses about 20 million gallons per day. That is less than 8% of the total available renewable surface flows from just half of their basins. That is what a surplus source looks like. On the demand side in Antigua, the truckers' delivery costs keep climbing from 200 EC dollars per 1,000 gallon, which is the equivalent of US $63 per 1,000 gallon in 2019. It has risen now to 300 EC dollars per 1,000 gallon, or equivalent to US $110 per 1,000 gallon in 2023. When the demand market is showing this type of inflationary pressure, it only means one thing in a competitive environment, and that is that that side of the market is being underserved under existing conditions. As to the question of the pricing of water, when we are in a water crisis, when most of our clients, especially households, are under severe water stress, raising or lowering the tariff for water is not the most pressing management issue. Some persons believe that pricing strategy should be used to achieve more conservation. That suggests increasing the rates. Others believe that the price needs to be held down to ensure more equity in access. But the echo on the street is this: we want more water. Water portfolio management provides a different perspective on the pricing of water. First, WPM evaluates this response on 5, not 2 or 3 alternative source options. This means that the utility is able to achieve some breathing space by switching between the competitive alternative sources, or more importantly, by employing cross-price subsidization. We have evidence of this from the polling of managers of water utilities. In 2012, the Economic Intelligence Unit of The Economist magazine did a study of water utilities' preparedness to meet the needs of the 2030s. 2 things stood out. In the general ranking of concerns, tariffs ranked 4th in the top 5 concerns, which were wasteful consumer behavior, insufficient capital resources for investment, dwindling water resources due to climate change, tariffs insufficient to encourage investment, and low operating recovery ratios. Interestingly, there was a significant difference in the ranking between utilities in the developed world and those in the developing world. Let me show you that. In the top 3 concerns of water utilities in the developing world, tariffs did not appear on their radar screen, but it appeared in the responses of utility managers in the developed world. Finally, let us talk a little about this complaint of becoming reliant on an external source of water. As for response to the issue of the potential dominance coming from an external source, there are really 3 short answers. The first is that our model based on water portfolio management speaks to the issue of supplemental water resources. In Antigua, that would be at most 24% of the total water supply. If you are really concerned about vulnerability of the national water system in Antigua, you should rightly be directed at the reliance of the Antigua water system on a single source coming from desalination plants, and that is providing up to 83% of its water supply. The dominant issue is a political perspective of water shortage, which incidentally does not hold much water, excuse the pun. If you continue in the vein of an economic perspective on this challenge, you only have to reflect on the fact that the huge food import bill of Caribbean states reflect our consumption of commodities grown by and containing some of the exporting countries' water supply. So in reality, the Caribbean is already a net importer of high-valued water virtually. And you should also remember that Singapore doesn't have a problem with importing 50% of its water supply. It doesn't seem to have hurt them very much. Once again, thank you for coming.